The agenda this week considered Ontario's carbon commitments. We examined the evolution of terror in a post-9/11 world and explored what a low price per barrel of oil is delivering to geopolitical bottom lines. The agenda's Week in Review now begins with Ontario's grocery store wars.
George, you've been covering the Canadian grocery market for 37 years, is that what you said?
Yeah, 37.
37 years. Okay, we're not going to go over all those 37. But how has the Canadian market generally changed over the for grocery stores over the last 15?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier, but 37 years ago, there were probably 25 different chains in Canada. And right now, we've got 3 big chains and perhaps 8 small independent chains. So it's been a concentration, continually concentrating, and more competitive.
Okay, the big 3, Loblaws, Metro, Sobeys, I'm guessing?
Yep.
Okay. Sarah, what have you noticed as you look at the retail landscape for grocery stores? What's changed for you in the last decade or two?
Well, I think that the consolidation is the number one story, and that's absolutely making things more competitive. But on top of that, I would say that there's been the growth in ethnic foods, and what we're seeing, obviously Canada with its large immigrant population means that ethnic foods are going to become more important, and we see some of the large retailers getting into that, and like Loblaws buying T&T, and so I think we're going to see now the same consolidation that George just described in the regular grocery, we're going to see also in ethnic foods, and that also means ethnic is going to go more into the mainstream grocery stores as well.
Is this a Canadian thing? Like, do we only see this in Canada, this sort of consolidation, the big 3 kind of thing?
Certainly to the degree it's been in Canada, that's the Canadian spin on it. There's concentration in parts of the United States, like Hispanic markets and that kind of thing, but they're limited to states. This is nationwide in Canada, and ethnic. I mean, one of the brand new competitive retailers in Canada is the Asian supermarkets. Like for instance, right now, and in the past 3 years, there's been about 90 Asian supermarkets opened up in the Greater Toronto area. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, and they're adding more competition.
Okay, when we look at, food's a big business any way you cut it. George, what are the margins? When we talk about margins, what do the grocers typically make selling food? Are they big? Super big?
No.
Tiny?
Grocery margins are minuscule. I mean, if a grocer today can do 2%, they're ecstatic.
2%?
2%. That's everything in. That's their net profit would be 2%. A lot of them are doing 1% or a little bit less. But the trick, of course, for groceries, if you buy 1 can of peas for 98 cents, the grocer maybe makes a penny. So what the grocer has to do is sell 100,000 cans of peas to make any money. And that's what the whole grocery industry is based on: volume. Volume.
Why are margins so low, though? I mean, you could mark up things, make bigger margins.
Well, no, but no, you can't, because your competitor is going to force you to keep it low. And the other thing is, ever since the recession of 2008, Canadians have been seeking bargains. They don't want to buy. I shouldn't say Canadians. A certain percentage of Canadians just don't want to buy grocery products at what we might consider to be a regular price. They want a discount. They want it on promotion. Like 40% of all groceries in Canada are now bought on a promotional basis. I mean, that's amazing.
Okay. Sarah, so George makes the point that small margins, 1%. Is there a difference when we look at things like processed food versus fresh produce, or vice versa when we look at margins?
Yes, there's a big difference. So there's a lot of products that the grocer is basically selling at almost just the cost that they're buying it for. Where they can make money tends to be in bakery, in deli. Those areas they could be making a 30 or 40% margin. Batteries, maybe a 70% margin, but that's making up for selling things at a loss in a lot of other areas, because once you add in not just the cost that they buy something for, but the cost of the real estate, to paying the employees and all of that, if you sell just at what you bought it for, you're never going to be able to make money unless you have some markups in some areas, which is why we're seeing, like in some of the mid-market grocers, they're starting to beef up that deli section, the prepared food, the sushi, the bakery, because that's actually where they can make money.
Okay, but I mean, was there a time when margins were bigger in this industry?
There was a time, so we have to go back about 100 years. So if we think back to, say, the 1920s or 1930s in Canada as well as in the United States, all grocery was extremely fragmented. It was moms and pops in towns with a very fragmented distribution system. And then a company that now is out of business but came in called the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, or the A&P, and that all in Canada as well as in the United States. And they came in with a more efficient distribution model, and that led to groceries being cheaper. And it was interesting, in the 1920s, people were probably paying about 40% of their total income was going towards groceries in the home. The A&P comes in with this efficient model, and then it went down to about 30%. So what does that mean? That means that the only response for other competitors is also to consolidate. And so you got a few more in the trend that George described, a few more of these very competitive players, all then competing on price. It was interesting, when the A&P came in, they actually got brought up on U.S. antitrust charges. Normally we think of antitrust as conspiring to have artificially high prices among a few players or one player, but instead they were accused of conspiring to have artificially low prices that were putting out the mom and pops. And indeed, the mom and pops did mainly go out of business, and many people said that was anti-competitive, and other people said, well, that's creative destruction, new business models destroying old business models. But that led to this competitive landscape in the way of everyone just competing on price. And so you don't have the flexibility to just increase price to make more money, because the consumers know they can go to the next competitor and get the lower price.
So the margins will stay this low?
The margins are going to stay this low. There's no, I mean, the grocers that make more money are like a Whole Foods. They make 3 or 4%, which still sounds low, but is great for grocery, but they have a completely different model. They're charging much higher prices for a much more service-oriented experience, and not every grocer can do that. Most consumers, most shoppers these days are going for the low prices. They have to feed their families. They can't feed their families at Whole Foods.
Okay, Bruce, I haven't been leaving you out. I want to bring you in now, though. You're our brand guy. So what do brands want from grocery stores? What are they asking for in order to help them sell their goods?
Well, I think once upon a time, brands looked at grocery stores as marketing partners, in effect, the way that you see in other classes of retail. And in recent years, and by recent, I guess I probably mean 15 or 20 years, they've become competitors in a sense, in a couple of ways. One, because they compete aggressively for margin, and they want the vendor to bear as much of the cost of going to market as possible. And secondly, because in certain cases, they can use the branded products as a way to identify market opportunities for themselves in the no-name business. And when you bear in mind that a grocery retailer is essentially a landlord who sells little tiny apartments this big, it's no surprise. It's all about velocity in that game, and so it's I think become adversarial.
It seems to me that the low price of oil isn't good for either guy, Rouhani or Khamenei. Politically speaking, though, does one have the upper hand in this?
I think things are more complex than they appear. First of all, to have the nuclear talks, Mr. Rouhani and his cabinet, they had the accord of the Supreme Leader, Mr. Khamenei. But at the same time, Mr. Khamenei and the ultra-conservatives in Iran, they were talking about the resistance economy, and saying that we don't need the nuclear talks, we can go without having given concessions, and we have to continue the line of the revolution. So that created difficulty. Now, what has come up very recently, actually, after the death of King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia, you know, Mr. Zarif, he made a trip to Riyadh, and he met John Kerry. And now, yesterday, he was summoned by the Iranian parliament that why did you take a walk with Mr. Kerry? Now, you see the complexity. At the same time, you have a government which is supposed to be approved by the Supreme Leader and the parliament at the same time, and they have to go forward in their concessions, but at the same time in their talks, in the nuclear talks, and they need the nuclear talks to relieve the sanctions, because without the relief of the sanctions, Iran cannot continue its economy. It's going to be in a very bad shape. especially because they think that the Saudis are fomenting a conspiracy against Iran by producing a lot of oil and putting a lot of oil in the market, and so the plunging the price of oil.
I am glad you brought up the Saudis, because I want to read a quote. This comes from the BBC. This is last month, prior to King Abdullah's death. But here's what was written on the BBC. From Riyadh, the world looks a grim place, and the Saudis have a host of concerns that they feel are not being addressed adequately, either by their allies in the West or by their partners in the region. Many experts talk of a Cold War between Saudi and Iran, where on every major issue of regional concern, an Iranian gain is viewed by the Saudis as a loss. And for the House of al-Saud, alarm bells are ringing. Okay, so that was written last month. We've had a seemingly somewhat smooth transition to King Salman in Saudi Arabia earlier this month. Are the alarm bells ringing for the House of al-Saud?
We have to put this into perspective. The Saudis have been of late so active, and this was post-American invasion, that the Saudis started to intervene in the Iraqi affairs because they felt that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, on behalf of the Islamic Republic, was involved in propping up the Iraqi militias. So the Saudis were expected to take the side of the Sunnis, while the Islamic regime of Iran was trying to fill the vacuum of Saddam being overthrown by the Americans. When the Arab Spring happened, of course, it led to the possibility of the Assad regime being brought down by pro-Saudi militants, and there we had another proxy war emerging out of the Arab Spring. The fact is that Iran and Saudi Arabia, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, have been competing massively for, I would say, hegemony to a certain degree in the region. But it is not that Iran, with its power, and the Saudis, I have to say that Saud al-Faisal, the Saudi foreign minister, himself, when the United States was ratcheting up rhetoric of democratization, and it seemed that after Iraq there could be a George W. Bush-initiated intervention against the Islamic Republic. I vividly recall that the Saudi foreign minister mentioned that Iran is an old civilization and we have to appreciate its potentials and expectations. So it is not that the Saudis do not appreciate Iran's regional position and claim to supremacy to a certain degree. It is just that they feel every now and again the Islamic Republic tries to encroach upon accepted order that has been developed between the Gulf nations, Arab Persian Gulf nations, and Saudi Arabia. And we should not forget that Saudi Arabia believes that it is the patron of all Sunni groups, all Sunni people in the region as well. And the Islamic Republic believes that it is the patron of all the Shia groups.
Since Nigeria returned to democracy in 1999, there was a notion that there would be a kind of an alternation, because the country is largely divided in terms of a Muslim north and a Christian south. And the first president, Obasanjo, came from the south, but because he'd come from the military, and historically, the military, from the time of British colonialism, the military had been drawn from the northern regions, from the House of Fulani ethnic groups, and from the Muslim north. And so because of that military background, the military and the northerners largely seemed to accept Obasanjo, who stayed there for a long time. When Obasanjo finally agreed to leave office and to not seek a re-election, seek a third term, he handpicked a successor who was a Muslim, and there we get that sort of divide. That's sort of, well, the alternation principle that we even have in Canada, that the Liberal Party historically had, English, French, English, French. And that was the way it was.
Official.
Well, it's not, and nor was it in Nigeria.
Fair enough.
But it was a notion that that's how it was supposed to work.
Right.
And Obasanjo handpicked his successor, a Muslim, who turned out to be very, very sick and died. Now, the current president, Goodluck Jonathan, who everybody knows from his cowboy hat that he liked to wear until
that great name.
Until these current elections, is a Christian from the South and from a minority tribe. But nobody ever thought that Goodluck Jonathan would become president. He was kind of a Dan Quayle figure, for those people who are old enough to remember that cultural reference. He was chosen But when the Muslim president died, he stepped in and he got to like the job. And because of that, I think the Northerners largely feel, wait a sec, this was our turn. What happened to alternation? We've waited through Obasanjo. We finally had a Muslim. Yes, the guy died. Step aside, Mr. Jonathan, and let's have our turn, which he has not done. So that makes the election all the more complicated because it's going to flare up these historic divides in Nigeria.
And as this campaign is going on, is the price of oil, what it means for Nigeria, playing out in the various party election platforms?
You know, to a very limited degree. What Goodluck Jonathan is promising is to keep on with the economic reforms that Obasanjo began and that he has sort of gone with, and to crack down on corruption in his own way. The opposition leader, if you like, Buhari, who's a former general, he is really running on a security platform. He's saying, I was a general, I got the thing straightened out last time, I can do that again. And he really hasn't focused that much on his economic platform. No one's all that clear what it is. The party he's running for, I think, is called the All Progressives Congress, APC. And there are some more left-wing people within that party. But I think a lot of people think that really the status quo, like the business community, which is concentrated in the largest city of Lagos, is largely probably going to support the APC and support Buhari. So you kind of think and those are the folks who probably like the economic turn the government has taken. So I think that probably suggests that he would keep on to a large extent with the existing program. And you know, there's a Goldman Sachs executive, Jim O'Neill, who coined the term BRICS and Mint and all these things. And he's recently come out and said that he doesn't anticipate that a Buhari victory would be catastrophic or would be a real problem for Nigeria. And that's a bit of a vote of confidence in the election and in Nigeria.
People talk about a clash of civilizations. It's really a crash of traditional territorial cultures and a generational communication. So young people are looking peer-to-peer across the internet. You know, I'm in a place like Sulawesi, which is between Borneo and New Guinea. These people were literally cannibals 3 generations ago. They all want to go and die in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Palestine. I mean, how the hell did that happen? There was a massive media-driven political awakening, and somehow we have to go into that. And the solutions I see coming out of our governments are from Planet Fruitcake. First of all, they say, okay, well, let's preach moderate Islam. And I say to them, did any of you ever had teenage kids? I mean, when does moderation appeal to anyone at that age? You've got to give them sort of heroes and glory. And secondly, most of the, not this panel, but most of the counterterrorism experts having the foggiest idea about what kinds of narratives, what kinds of stories are coming out to attract these people. I mean, Islamic history was a parallel history, very independent from the Western history. The West was pretty much like we look at Africa now. It was a dark continent until very recently. And there's a very, very deep and very rich history. I mean, everybody in that part of the world knows the stories of the first 4 caliphs, you know, the fatherly Abu Bakr, the giant Omar, the billionaire Othman, the generous but valiant Ali. Stories like we know of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Napoleon, none of our people know anything about that. So what we're trying to do is offer liberal values, which are even failing in our societies. I mean, we do studies where we show that the traditional values of liberal democracy do not engender costly sacrifices among our own youth, which is why, for example, 1 out of every 4 young people in France between the ages of 24 have a favorable attitude to ISIS because it's offering something glorious. So yes, deal with local communities and try to get local communities to take responsibility. But I think much more important is trying to plug into this, again, massive media-driven political awakening.
Actually, more to the point, one of the things that ISIS is offering right now is a chance to relive the stories of the 7th century, of the original expansion of Islam. I mean, the nom de guerre of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is deliberately chosen. And again, they are behaving in many ways like the Arabs did in those first few critical decades. So they're inviting all these youngsters, you know, come on down and get in the big adventure.
Yeah, it's like the old
Because
west, right?
it's
Come
just
on
like the
down.
old days.
Yeah.
It's King Arthur come to life.
Yeah, but
Get
you
a
know what
suit of armor and join.
But you know what happens when those kids come on down? Because we have some good data here too. When those kids come on down, they usually don't stay. And the reason they don't stay is the reality doesn't match at all this dramatic vision and the hopes that they have.
And this is what you wrote in your book. Perhaps never in the history of human conflict have so few people with so few actual means and capabilities frightened so many. And I want to go around the table on this one. Scott, let me begin with you. I mean, for the average Canadian, Ontarian watching this program, or American for that matter, how would you characterize the real threat that it poses to us?
Well, I think the real threat has been, publicity is the oxygen of this particular movement. And given the way our media and our political, the relationship of our political establishment to the media is, it has become a very dangerous phenomena in large part, because of the hysterical reaction to it. I mean, take the events you've mentioned, except for the Madrid bombing, say. Take the Boston bombing, for example. I mean, these two schnooks, basically, who weren't really recruited by anybody, they picked up the idea of making a pressure cooker bomb, and the world was put on world military alert by the United States, which spent close to $1 billion, locked down the city of Boston, and in order to capture these two guys, which they eventually did. And then they're calling the pressure cooker, and they're actually prosecuting these young people under the Patriot Act and calling it a weapon of mass destruction. I mean, when you have that kind of hysterical reaction, then any such event is amplified by orders of magnitude way beyond what it actually represents. But that's a very real phenomena, because once it is amplified, it does become real, and I think that's the danger, the great danger we face, at least on Western streets.
Okay.
And of course, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda know this very much, and they want to bring the battle to Western streets for that very reason.
Okay, if it's being overhyped though, Scott, give me my advice. Am I just not supposed to worry about this stuff? Is there a real threat against me and Canadians and Americans?
Sure there is, but treat it exactly, for example, the way the Israelis treat the threat. I mean, certainly not greater than Columbine or the shootings in Connecticut.
Okay. Wesley, where are you on this? I mean, how real of a threat does this pose to we in the West?
The critical thing, I think, to look at in terms of trying to decide whether we're exaggerating or underestimating the phenomenon, whether we're living with too much fear or too little, is actually the nature of societal responses in the aftermath of attacks. Not government responses, not military or intelligence or security agency responses, but societal responses. And I hope all my colleagues around the table would agree with me that in regard to all of the recent attacks, from the failed plot in Belgium to Paris, to Sydney, to Ottawa, and further back, certainly from my perspective, the societal response has been magnificent. People were not panicked. People showed various forms of solidarity in very moving and unorchestrated ways. And from my perspective, this is actually one of the great counterterrorism strengths that we have, through actually no effort on the part of the government, established a significant foundation of societal resistance. And it's one of the reasons why I referred back to the al-Suri great manifesto on individual jihad terrorism. One of the reasons why the whole rationale for it is faulty. It is not going to change people's minds about how they want to live their lives, and it's not going to change people's behavior. Of course, we would like to stop all terrorist attacks. Not all of them can be stopped. We insist that when they take place, that they're dealt with. But I don't see anything extraordinary in that kind of response. And in a future utopia, it would be nice to think that the scourge of terrorism, along with all kinds of other scourges, could actually be eradicated.
Go ahead, Scott. You get the last word here.
All right. There is a tacit alliance. This is not true in Canada, and it's not true in the United States, but there is a tacit alliance between the rise of a narrow xenophobic right and radical Islam that is tearing apart Europe, that is sundering the middle class, that is dividing them in ways that has not happened in Europe since the 1920s and the 1930s. And let me assure you, I was on the streets with Mr. Soros on Independence Day in Hungary, with people marching with black shirts and signs against both immigrants and anti-Semitic signs. And I'm finding this increasingly across Europe. And to tell you the truth, the middle class really doesn't know what to do, nor do the political leaders. It's not just a question of radical Islam. It's a question of the laziness, in a sense, of democratic liberal values that we have today. It's failure to motivate people. And I think that's a real threat, especially in Europe.
When a government says it is looking to act on quote-unquote carbon pricing, what exactly does that mean?
It means it's going to put a price on carbon emissions. And so it has two general options for doing that. It can use a cap and trade system. This is an implicit way of putting a price on carbon emissions. So it creates a certain amount of allowances. An allowance is required for a firm or a household to emit a ton of greenhouse gases. Those allowances obtain a value in the market, and that's the price on carbon. So if you want to emit a ton of carbon as a firm, you have to hold an allowance. That allowance has a price, and that's the price on carbon. A carbon tax is a direct way of putting a price on carbon. In this case, government explicitly sets the price on carbon, and every time you put a ton of carbon out into the atmosphere, you pay that tax. And so these can be, roughly equivalent systems. They both put a price on carbon, and they both, as a result, end up encouraging firms and encouraging individuals to reduce their carbon emissions because emitting all of a sudden became more expensive.
And Elizabeth, again, just going back to the basics here, why would a government want to put a price on carbon to begin with?
I think there are two main reasons. First of all, they're very interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is critical in a carbon-constrained world. And secondly, they want to ensure that their goods and services aren't being prejudiced by neighboring carbon border tax adjustments. So certainly they want to ensure that they remain competitive in an increasingly climate-conscious world that is putting a price on carbon.
And can I infer that you are in favor of doing such a thing?
I'm certainly in favor of carbon pricing, and I'd like to task the media with maybe not seeing as much of a distinction between a tax or a cap and trade system and worrying more about the details of how the program is created and implemented.
Okay, understood. And Nicholas, again, same question to you. Do I infer that you are also in favor of putting a price on carbon?
Absolutely, and my caveat would have been exactly the same as Elizabeth's. I think that these systems can work nearly identically if they're designed nearly identically, and they can work very differently if they're designed differently. So all of the nuance is in the details of how these policies are designed. Whether they cover all the sectors or whether they cover just a subsector of a subset of the sectors, whether they have a high price or a low price, what they do with the revenue that's raised from these carbon pricing mechanisms, whether they return it to emitters or whether they return it to, say, certain households, or whether they use it to cut taxes, whether they use it to invest in green goods. These are the design decisions around carbon pricing that really influence the effectiveness and the efficiency of the programs, more so than the choice between cap and trade and carbon tax.
Okay, so we now know what it is. We now know why governments may want to do it. Candace, that takes me to you. What's your view on it?
Well, I think that whenever we're going to implement a broad-based policy that has effects throughout the economy, we should be incredibly skeptical. We should be cautious, consider not only the foreseen unintended or foreseen consequences of implementing this kind of a tax or pricing scheme, but also the unforeseen, potentially adverse consequences, particularly to the economy, how it will affect economic growth, how it will affect households, particularly low-income households and folks that already struggle to make ends meet. When you're talking about imposing this kind of a broad tax, we should certainly be conscious of all of the different consequences throughout the economy, and as well as balancing that with a look at carbon emissions and how effective these kinds of taxes and schemes have worked in other jurisdictions. Have they actually produced the optimal outcome that we've intended, or has something else happened? And I think that when you look at it a little bit more broadly, you see that these kind of policies haven't actually lived up to what we've been promised that they're going to deliver.
Well, let me follow up on that. Have you looked at other jurisdictions that have brought in this kind of a new idea for putting a price on carbon, and have there been consequences that were unforeseen that you think, with the benefit of hindsight, ought not to have happened?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can look at Australia. They brought in a carbon tax and it was repealed. It was incredibly unpopular. People didn't like it. They didn't have a feeling that it was actually helping reduce carbon emissions in Australia. They just felt that they were being handcuffed and that given other efforts around the world, their efforts were futile. The recent Australian government was brought in on a campaign solely. One of the prime promises of that campaign was to eliminate the carbon tax, and they did. Typical family in Australia saves $500. We can also look at British Columbia, who brought in a carbon tax in 2008. Now, there's been a couple of different studies looking at carbon emissions in British Columbia. Research that I've seen out of the University of Northern British Columbia shows that British Columbia actually hasn't reduced carbon emissions as fast as the rest of Canada. And so I think that there are a couple of problems with the carbon tax in real life in that it doesn't actually reduce emissions in the way that it claims that it should.
Let me go to Elizabeth on that then. Do you agree that there are problems of unforeseen consequences and that putting a price on carbon doesn't actually achieve what you just said it ought to achieve, namely a reduction in the pollution that's caused?
I wouldn't agree that that's uniformly the case. I would say that the devil is in the detail and design does matter. But Steve, what you really have to look at as well, and I think a lot of the climate skeptics of the world are very reticent to look at, is the costs of inaction. So do you really want to subject Canadian goods and services leaving the jurisdiction to carbon border tax adjustments from the likes of the US, from China, and from other jurisdictions that are clearly designing systems that have that in them?
And what's the answer to that?
Absolutely not. Let's look at what target we want to achieve, first of all. Secondly, what is the most efficient, and certainly I'll give Canada's efficient. We want an efficient and effective system. And then finally, what are the costs of inaction if we don't implement something? So those are the three parameters we really want to drive home in designing a smart carbon system, pricing system. And what we also want to do is realize that in any system, it's never perfect in initial design. So design it to be reevaluated on an iterative basis. And no, we're not going to get everything perfect in the first instance. And much like Alberta has done, which has been very effective, much like Quebec has done, which is becoming very effective, and the EU has done, which was effective in its first instance and continues to be a price driver, design it to be revisited on a regular basis.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.